Cancel culture claims another scalp, and this time it's the kind of liberal staff editor of the New York Times editorial page because, well, you just can't be too woke. Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, Bari Weiss had a really strange take on this whole job as an opinion page editor. She wanted a variety of opinions to appear on the page.
What?
I know, it's
At
shocking.
the Times?
It's shocking. I can't believe she survived there for 3 whole years. Actually, what's shocking is the New York Times brought her on board in 2017 to broaden the opinion page's scope because management and ownership realized that the paper's focus had become so narrow that they did not understand or see the Trump phenomenon coming. And then she had to leave. She resigned because they couldn't stand her doing her job. Gentlemen, let me read this to you. She published her resignation letter that she wrote to her boss, Arthur Sulzberger, the paper's publisher. And the whole thing's just scathing. But let me start with this bit. She says, several colleagues perceived to be friendly with me were badgered by coworkers. My work and my character are openly demeaned on company-wide Slack channels where masthead editors regularly weigh in. There, some coworkers insist I need to be rooted out if this company is to be a truly inclusive one, while others post axe emojis next to my name. Still, other New York Times employees publicly smear me as a liar and a bigot on Twitter with no fear that harassing me will be met with appropriate action. And gentlemen, as damning as that is, the environment in which Bari Weiss had to work, it's actually the least damning thing in her resignation letter. Scott, I want to go to you first on this next quote. If you'll take a listen to this. She writes, Twitter is not on the masthead of the New York Times, but Twitter has become its ultimate editor. As the ethics and mores of that platform have become those of the paper itself has increasingly become a kind of performance space. Stories are chosen and told in a way to satisfy the narrowest of audiences rather than to allow a curious public to read about the world and then to draw their own conclusions. I was always taught that journalists were charged with writing the first rough draft of history. Now, history itself is one more ephemeral thing molded to fit the needs of a predetermined narrative. Scott, on one of our segments last week, you were saying mostly it was laziness that was ruining the pages of our country's newspapers. Would you maybe like to revisit that after hearing what Bari had to say?
No, despite the vigorous dressing down that you gave me last week, I'm going to stick by my vague and inconclusive guns. First of all, let me just say I do subscribe to the New York Times digital edition. However, I don't read the opinion page. I've always thought that if I want the New York Times opinion, I'll just read page 1. And that's the way I've been doing it for many years. You really need not go to the editorial board. Secondly, I think it's interesting because for years, the New York Times, and we were taught this in journalism school way back in the day, the New York Times has really set the news budget for the news hole at America's newspapers all around the country. People look to the New York Times to see essentially what is it that's important. And a lot of smaller, mid-size, and even big city papers look to the New York Times and say, okay, well, if we're covering the stuff that they're covering, we must be on the right track. Now, this is kind of flipped around. And we essentially have Twitter setting the agenda, Twitter driven in many cases by bot traffic of unknown provenance, and some of that being Russian provenance, that the people look to Twitter and they think, well, this is what people are talking about. No, this is what a tiny little fraction of 0.001% of people are talking about. And if you take your cues from what's happening on social media, you'll find that you just become more like the people on social media. And those algorithms are designed to do just that. So the New York Times, while it may not have such an algorithm itself, in effect becomes part of the algorithm because they are just reinforcing the echo cycle that Twitter and Facebook have designed. So it is, I would say it's sad. It It is sad. I mean, the New York Times, because of their preeminence, because of their previous credibility, was in a position to really be the paper of record for this country, to really have a broad and vigorous discussion about our civil mores, to take your phrase. And they have failed in that. When they were completely blindsided by Donald Trump's victory, every one of those editors should have sat back and said, "We don't know nothing about nothing." And they should have stopped and said, and I'm not saying you have to agree with the people who voted for President Trump, but I think you need to realize that you're out of step with at least half the country and start to reevaluate and say, well, at the very least, if we really want to advance our liberal ideas, we better become a lot more aware of what the other side thinks. Maybe we should let them in and let them talk. But apparently this lesson has not been learned, or it was learned only briefly until they saw the consequences of free speech is actually unpopular speech, or at least unpopular with the insiders.
Yeah, as Twitter is, I think maybe 10% of America is on there, and not very many of them are actually active. And of that 10%, about 1% of Twitter is political Twitter. And they're mostly people like me who just like really talking about this stuff a lot. But Twitter got so toxic, I haven't been on there in over a year, and I'm much happier and calmer now without it. But if that's what's driving the New York Times, well, we all know how stupid algos are. You ever buy a 65-inch TV, and all of a sudden all the ads on your web browser are trying to get you to buy another 65-inch TV?
Too late.
Algos are dumb. All right, Bill, this next part from her letter is, well, just as damning as the first two parts, if not more so. Bari writes, part of me wishes I could say that my experience was unique, but the truth is that intellectual curiosity, let alone risk-taking, is now a liability at the Times. Why edit something challenging to our readers or write something bold only to go through the numbing process of making it ideologically kosher when we can assure ourselves of job security and clicks by publishing our 4,000th op-ed arguing that Donald Trump is a unique danger to the country and the world? And so self-censorship has become the norm. Isn't that even worse, Bill, than censorship from above?
Well, this is the phenomenon of the age, Steve. Yeah. And this is the thing that, if written language survives the next several years, and we look back on the early part of the 21st century, we'll realize what actually happened here. We had and continue to have, for that matter, a government that is beautifully designed to protect us from censorship in terms of official censorship from government, enforced by rule of law and by guys with guns and so on. In other words, we have really built a constitution that protects us from censorship on the part of the government. But no one thought that the censorship would come from within. That was absolutely the blind spot. What's so astonishing about these times that we live in is that all of the power that the left has in terms of canceling everything is power that we give to them. We simply give it to them. Yeah. We bow our heads and, well, I don't want to be considered a racist. I don't want to be, and psychologically, social proof is the most powerful actor upon human behavior. People will do things that other people are doing, even if they're things that they don't want to do or don't agree with. And then when you take social media, which amplifies social proof and peer pressure by 5-6 orders of magnitude, before it used to be if you had a contrary opinion, it was known to your friends and your family, and that's it. Now, if you have a contrary opinion, it's known to the entire world. And all of these forces are at work, and they're driving people into deeper and deeper silos, and narrower and narrower and narrower. The reason this story is so poignant and at the same time so kind of disgraceful and disgusting is because her resignation letter, which is extremely eloquent, is a classical liberal's call for classical liberal values. Yeah. This is the New York Times. We're supposed to be a newspaper. We're supposed to gather facts. We believe in freedom of speech. We believe in truth as an objective truth, and our job is to go find it. It is a cry from a classical liberal to the world that has no longer got a place for her at the New York Times anyway. And the part about this, Steve, that's so disgusting is that the people who are doing all of the intimidating are celebrating now. They're celebrating. They're happy. They got rid of a voice that didn't agree with them. And so now their newspaper is more ideologically pure. And you got to watch out for people who talk about things like ideological purity, because those are the people who usually put people up against the wall. Because if the heaven on earth that we have been promised by our ideology isn't occurring, the only possible explanation would be because there are people who are not with the program. And if we just get rid of those folks, then everything will be fine. Now, they didn't put her up against the wall, but they did basically execute her career. And they're celebrating it. And all that has to happen to stop all of this, it goes to the whole thing, Steve, statues, the whole thing, is just for people to just stand up and just, administer a 2-word phrase. And that's all. To do it enthusiastically, but no one does. No one does. And there we are, So I feel for her, and I wonder if she is the latest in an enormous tsunami of former liberals who are looking around at what so-called liberalism, left-wing politics has become, and realize that it is now it's no longer about free speech. It's no longer about human rights. It's no longer about any of those things. It is now about intimidation, silencing opposition, and destroying you if you disagree with Mao's Little Red Book. And I'm thinking that she might be looking at her party affiliation a little bit differently, like millions of other Americans are. And the final thing I'll say about the Times is, Steve, it's like when yet another of the few voices of contrarianism are forced out of the Times, it's like watching a lake in the desert slowly evaporate, and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And as it gets smaller and smaller, it also gets more and more briny, the salt content, it just shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, becomes more and more toxic, and smells worse and worse and worse, until finally there's nothing but white crust where this big lake used to be. And that's what's happening now. And there are people in the Times celebrating it, and a lot of readers are celebrating it too. But truth will not be stopped no matter what they think. And that is our great consolation. That and the fact that we have the guns and they don't.
I'll take truth and guns for 400, please, Alex. Folks, let me finish up with one last item from Ms. Weiss's resignation letter. She says, the paper of record is, more and more, the record of those living in a distant galaxy, one whose concerns are profoundly removed from the lives of most people. This is a galaxy in which, to choose just a few recent examples, the Soviet space program is lauded for its diversity. The doxing of teenagers in the name of justice is condoned, and the worst caste systems in human history includes the United States alongside Nazi Germany. I would like to thank Bari Weiss for having written this eloquent resignation letter. And if I may address her directly, I'd just like to say, Ms. Weiss, we might not agree on much or maybe anything politically, but the New York Times and American journalism could use a lot more people just like you.
Well said.
And that is it for that on This Right Angle. Thanks for watching. Remember, content like this needs sponsors like you, and you can do that by going to BillWhittle.com and becoming a member. We'd love to have you on board. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.